Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. The French Caravelle jet airliner was one of the first commercially successful short to medium range passenger jets in operation. This review covers the Lindberg Caravelle French airliner in 196 scale, model kit number HL513. Round 2 rates this as a skill level 3 for advanced modelers. There's 120 pieces on 3 trees molded in white and clear plastic. This package recalls the era when model manufacturers competed by packing as much detail into their designs as possible. And this model has been around since the 70s in Lindberg kits, but this unique iteration features a clear plastic port side fuselage for see-through display. The entire interior is visible from the port side, including the forward, aft, and a fully detailed passenger cabin. There are also 6 passengers and crew figures, along with an aircraft boarding ramp. Additionally, this kit has working elevators, ailerons, and stabilizers, and fully functional landing gear and flaps. This model also comes with upgraded cartograph decals and a 4-page book-style instruction sheet with paint callouts. As a bonus, this kit is made in the USA. The overall dimensions are length 13 inches, wingspan 14 inches, and height 3.5 inches. It also has a display stand that's 4 inches in diameter and is 3.5 inches high. Now here's my take on what to call an open box review. Yes, I could pick up each piece and tell you that yes, this piece is in the box, but I'm just going to let you look at all of them at one time so you can get your in-box review in just under 10 seconds. Here are the decals for this kit. As you can see, they're very colorful and the registry is good. I strongly recommend using some decal setting solution to make it fit those contours, but as always, use the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when using any of the products mentioned here in the review for your own protection. For most of the construction, I use Model Master liquid cement and sometimes a slow setting tube glue, but other adhesives are used too for strength like super glue and white glue for clear parts. Mostly the paints are Tamiya acrylic bottle paints that are shot through an airbrush, or rattle can paints that can be used for things like primers. The first thing that I did with the parts is to soak the trees in some warm water that's had a little bit of soap detergent put into it to clean off any of the grime or oils that might be on the kit. Just for reference, I printed out a color call-out chart here along with the particular brands and styles of paint that I use for this kit. It's not mandatory that you use it, it's just for your reference in case you want to. The instruction sheet shown here has a couple of issues. Part number 4 is used to refer to 2 different parts, but they both belong to the latrine borders and frames in the back of the plane. Additionally, I use what I call a identification method to find out which parts are all painted the same color. So before I even start my model build, I make a copy of the instructions and then I go through and identify by color code each color that is used so that I can group those parts and paint them all at the same time before I start. There are a number of things in this kit that will remind you of an era that's gone by in the technology of making models. One of them is the extremely heavy sprues attached to the fuselage for the clear part. Notice that I used a razor saw here to cut it off as close as I could, but then after trimming I needed to use a file to get it down to the surface, then use a succession of progressively finer sanding pads from about 150 all the way up to 12,000 in order to clean out and clear out the glass for your model. The copyright script for this model is simply printed on the floorboard, so use some lacquer thinner and just wipe it clean. Sand it off with fine sandpaper. I spray painted the seats with an ivory color to represent the linen and also the separate seat portions all at one time. I sprayed the parts for the starboard side of the plane and all of the interior bulkheads and walls with a flat white primer. Look over the body for blemishes, and in this case I found quite a large dome-shaped blemish that should be removed from the point where you insert the display stand. I taped off the horizontal stabilizer and the spine of the plane there and painted the rest of these parts peach color for the interior of the aircraft. To give the interior some realism, I painted the base of the floor with some white glue, and then I used some embossing powder in a tan color to lay a layer of carpeting around the entire floor of the vehicle. Here's one of the misidentified parts that I talked about, where two different parts are known as part number 4 on the layout. These are the doors, which I marked men's and women's, for the lavatories, and you'll also need the curved portions that fit inside the fuselage to assemble the bathrooms for the aft section. I used a silver Sharpie here to highlight the armrests on the seats. You may have to trim some of the flash off of the base of the seat backs here, but install all seats to all the rows. The pilot's compartment poses a little problem, as the location of the bulkhead there is not very clear in the instructions. It seems to indicate that you place it into the two holes towards the front of the cabin, but actually I filed off the tabs here and glued this to the floor somewhat back of the major step there. Gather up all the pieces that need to be painted silver. I used a Tester's 1246 spray here because it had a good sheen for the era. Now the body will have to be taped off so that you preserve the white portion on the upper surface. Use a good quality tape there, and then mask off the rest of the upper section and spray all the parts silver. With much of the painting done, you'll have a collection of parts that looks like this. Now I painted the figures, and you'll note this fella here has posable arms. Notice here that all of the bulkheads have been placed into the plane's interior, and the forward section is painted a light blue color. The seats are kind of an interior green, and then the console, instrument console, is black. Now the passengers I painted with a light gray lower and a bluish upper, and then I made the two ladies into hostesses, and you can just use any colors you wish for the remaining passengers, including the fellow who's absorbed in that magazine or book. Glue the control console up front, right in front of where the seats go, and then of course the pilots go into place in those seats, and then just put the passengers wherever you see fit. But since I thought they were first on the plane, they probably were sitting right up front. Later I moved the one hostess from the galley area to the other side of the door. Now we'll gather up the starboard side of the plane and the two window strips and the interior for assembly. But notice the section that's been painted blue to correspond to the pilot's cabin, and then the lower sections have been painted 1146 silver along with the aft and tail segments because they're going to be plain aluminum from the inside of the plane. Now use some super glue to glue the starboard side of the interior floor and place that onto the tabs that it fits onto in the interior there. Make sure that all the floorboard remains straight and contacts all the tabs in the locations where they're provided to support the floor. Gather these pieces to assemble the front landing gear. They've been painted silver, including the wheels, because the tires will actually be painted rubber black a little bit later. And notice the white arrow here points to what is a positive stop that allows the landing gear to flip down and stay up in position after it rolls over another abutment there. Up till now, this build has gone pretty well, but here's where, quite literally, the rubber hits the road as we work with the landing gear. And I have to say, the engineer that designed this mechanism could have easily built the actual Caravelle himself. The engineering is stunning, but it's very delicate, and there's two ways to approach this. You can either go along with my instructions here to assemble the functional landing gear, or you can glue them in place, or just glue the flaps on and make this an in-flight model. Now make note that the landing gear are left and right-handed because they retract at different angles. Gather the parts shown on the left side of the photo here to assemble them into the landing gear sections, and there are two of these to assemble. So put those together, and note that the carrier there will swivel up and down, as well as the wheels will rotate around. After you've assembled the landing gear and give them time to set up, we'll start working on the ball flap here. Now there's a lot going on, but notice the black arrow in the upper right merely corresponds to the right or left-handedness of the flaps. They go on one side or the other, so keep these all straight for the proper right or left-hand side. Now the red line and arrows indicate where the fork is glued to the flap there to trap the ball joint into place. Now the white arrow is pointing to the socket where that ball sets, and I placed a small amount of petroleum jelly in there to allow that to be friction free. But note that you don't glue that ball into place. It just sits there and gets trapped into place by the fork. The black arrow here shows the end of the ball joint that is glued to the strut. There's a hole in the top of the strut where this is glued, and make sure that the fork is parallel to the strut and points straight down so that the ball operates up and down in that direction. Now glue that ball stud into position in the hole in the strut. You might have to clear that out to make sure it fits, and then let it dry thoroughly. I would use some really good super glue here to make sure that that joint stays in place. This slide illustrates where the ball is with the overlay there and the stud that's projected into the strut, so that you can see how it will bend and flex when it's in operation with the functional gear. Here you can see the landing gear after they've been placed into the wing. Notice the blue bar there, which is the line of the strut's mount up at the top, and it sets right into some cradles that are built into the lower wing. Now you'll need to make sure no glue gets on the strut itself, but when you glue the wing halves together later, you'll have to make sure that the tops of these cradles are glued to the top of the wing. Also note the black arrow there. There's a thin strip of plastic there on the wing for the strut opening that you guide the end of the strut through and angle it down towards the wheel strut. So it's all aligned pretty carefully, and it all works together, but it's a pretty tricky setup. This shows the landing gear in the retracted mode with the strut flap up into the wing. Now here's that same view from the inside of the wing bottom. Now we'll build the two sets of the wing flaps for the main wing sections by assembling the parts shown at the top into the assembly at the lower section. Now we can assemble the outer aileron sections too for the wing flaps. Now we'll assemble the wing halves by adding the wheel flaps into place for the main landing gear, and there's cradles for that. Also the main wing flap has cradles and a slot where a post is guided into and through there for activity, and the outboard ailerons just have some notches, and those are placed in there. Then carefully glue the outside segments and especially the tops of the cradles to make sure that they are glued into place and keep the flaps and wheel struts in position. After removing the gluing clamps, this is what you should have for a functional wing. Notice that the landing gear flap is up in position and the wheels are at an angle, which is why those wheels swivel on the strut. Also, the ailerons are in place and are fully functional. Now we'll do the same thing to assemble the left wing, and I used some extra clips here to make sure that some of the tabs were glued with a little extra super glue to make sure that they stayed put together. Also notice that there's some seams that you'll have to address on some of the wing slats here, so keep an eye on those for repairs later. Gather these parts as we get ready for assembly of the fuselage halves and wings. Also note those red ovals there indicated by the white arrows. You're going to want to pack some heavy plumber's putty or put some BBs or something in there and then wall that off with some styrene to give your weight forward so that you don't get a tail dragger, which will bring the back of the plane down when the engines and tail fins are put on. Now install part number 42, which is an internal structure to mount the rear tail planes into the starboard side of the craft fuselage. Use some good glue there to keep it into place and make sure that it is straight and true. Using the box art, I decided to paint the engine mount structures a dark blue to match the decal on the sideline of the plane. Now install the forward landing gear and flaps. The flaps just will hang there until after you get the fuselage assembled. I installed the rear loading ramp into one of the grooves on the starboard side and just taped it into position to stay there until I join the halves. Also note that we are getting the wings ready to insert, and in the instructions they tell you to install those back at step 6, but I found that I could wiggle them into place. At this point I joined the fuselage halves together, but also note that if you want the cabin door closed, you have to install that into the starboard side before you put the fuselage halves together. But I kept mine out to appear later as an open door for loading of the passengers. As I was waiting for the fuselage halves to cure, I gathered these parts to assemble the loading ramp and put that together using the paint scheme that they showed on the box art. Now, I also scraped off the area there where the script shows so that the nameplate would be visible, and painted the upper areas aluminum. Here's what we have so far with the main frame built and the passenger ramp built too, and the whole unit up on its wheels. Now we'll use some slow setting glue to assemble the rudder, and I say that because we're going to start the assembly here, and then the bottom peg of the rudder fits into a socket at the base there of the fuselage, and then you wrap around the little hook at the top for action so that it will swivel freely. So make sure you don't get glue on that hook at the top, but then clasp the rudder around that and into the little slot at the bottom. Use a weak clamp to make sure that it glues together properly. Now I just sprayed the airframe with some future floor polish to give it a slight sheen in order to get it ready for decaling. The decals give you a couple of options here. You can either paint this as a passenger plane with the windows decal strips, or you can just decal over those to make this a cargo plane. And you could actually, of course, paint the clear side of this plane in order to have the entire thing painted and decaled if you desire. I just decided that I only wanted decals on the white and non-clear side of the plane, so I took the decals and got some hot water and some setting solution ready and decaled the plane in that manner. I cut the main blue stripe decal here at some natural joints because it's much easier to install than trying to align the entire thing up. And notice that the blue stripe in the back didn't really fit the contour of the engine mount, and actually wasn't even quite long enough to reach the other section from the tail of the plane. So we'll touch that up with some dark blue paint. The ID letters go on the wing, but there's a vertical stabilizer there in the way, so cut that at an angle so that you can fit the letters around that stabilizer. The red tail stripe comes in two pieces for decaling, but I've never seen a decal actually be able to conform properly to a contour like that. So I just taped that off and used some red paint to finish off that red swoosh stripe. You may need to do a little filing here of the cockpit opening, but the cockpit window just snaps into place and it'll stay there without glue. Now gather up the parts for the motors, and note that the clear pod there goes on the port side with the clear see-through side for display. So assemble the engines and use a little toning to make the jet props look more realistic. You can assemble those and there'll be a seam, so you'll have to clean that up and then touch that up with a little silver paint, and then you can decal the unit and paint that forward section dark blue like the box art. Now apply the decal and let the whole assembly dry. Now assemble the tailplanes and paint those units silver and let them dry. Now we can gather up the final parts and assemble the rest of the plane, including the loading door, which I decided to add to the outside as if it were open and ready for passengers. Here's a view of the underside of the plane with all the flaps up in position and the landing gear up, as well as the loading door. There's also a part number 67 there that's used to plug that hole where you would put the display stand. I assume that's for display with the landing gear down. It doesn't really lock anything into place, so it's an optional part. You can assemble the display stand now. It's got a 4-inch dome and a stand, and you can put that together along with the sign for the Caravelle. I painted that blue and then once again just scraped off the lettering to show it so that it has a nice look to it when you displaying your final assembly. So there you have it. This is a great subject matter kit, and there's two ways to approach assembly. You can do it the hard way or the easy way. The easy way would be just to glue the wheels up inside and glue the flaps into place and display it as an in-flight model. The other way is to make sure that all of the fully functional ailerons, flaps, landing gears, and landing ramps all work properly. Either way, it can either be challenging or easy to build, but nonetheless it's great subject matter, and you can see into the passenger compartment, and you can also detail one of the jet engines for view that way. Overall, it's a great kit if you have some patience and time to assemble it fully. Otherwise, it's a great little builder if you just want to put it on display as an in-flight model. But either way, you can be proud when you're finished with this special piece of aviation history. We hope you liked this premium quality step-by-step review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can find us on Facebook and also at our website, www.rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!